Hi, so this is a very quick video looking at language analysis. So that's AO2, that's paper 1, question 2, and paper 2, question 3. And what we're going to focus on is what's called cumulative effect. That's where you identify groups of words, and then you talk about how those groups of words come together to create specific meaning. So let's look at this extract from Jane Eyre, and we're going to focus on how this extract is using adjectives. I'm going to read the extract through, and I'm going to highlight the adjectives that are being used. Folds of scarlet drapery shut in my view to the right hand. To the left were clear panes of glass, protecting but not separating me from the drear November day. At intervals, while turning over the leaves of my book, I studied the aspect of that winter afternoon. Afar, it offered a pale blank of mist and cloud. Near a scene of wet lawn and storm-beat shrub, with ceaseless rain sweeping away wildly before a long and lamentable blast. So if we look at these adjectives, we can already see that a great number are being used by the writer. And what we need to consider is, why has the writer chosen to use those adjectives? And how does the way that the adjectives fall in terms of order, how does that contribute to meaning? So if we look here, it starts with an adjective that describes the colour. Now, scarlet is a very deep red. We may have associations of it with blood or suffering, but as it's linked here to the drapery, to the curtains, it almost has a positive connotation. It tells us that perhaps the place where she is very rich and very opulent. We then have that positivity reinforced by the use of clear. We see clear as being a positive idea. However, this is closely followed by the use of drear, suggesting that the November day is very unpleasant. So that's a negative idea. We then see these negative adjectives increase. We've got winter, we've got pale and blank, we've got wet, we've got storm-beat, ceaseless and long. So if we look just at that very quickly, you can see that we've got a couple of positives, and this is the place where our narrator is sitting, so it's very safe where she is. And then we've got this description of the weather outside. We want to look at the 4 most powerful adjectives from this, and we don't need to write these in any particular order, although I do believe it would be best to write them in chronological order. Well, I'm going to start with ceaseless. I think that that's a powerful adjective. And what I need to think about are the connotations of that word ceaseless. For me, that means that something doesn't give up. So something doesn't give up. I'm also going to go for storm beat. The reason I'm choosing this is it tells me that, the storm has been brutal, harsh, punishing. I'm also going to take the word wet. It gives me a really clear indication of the weather. And finally, I'm going to charge winter. So winter for me has connotations of all of these things. So if I look now at the relationship between these words, that's how I start to show the cumulative effect. The fact that I'm being told it's winter gives me a preconceived idea of what the weather and the environment is going to be like. It already sets up a negative tone. I imagine things that are cold and dark and wet. So I understand now that it's an unpleasant scene outside the house. However, wet gets developed by me being told that the weather is storm beating. Therefore, I can understand that it's not just winter, but it's a particularly unpleasant winter. A particularly unpleasant winter, especially when compared to the rather comfortable scarlet drapery and clear panes of glass where our narrator is sitting. Finally, I have ceaseless presented to me. Now, ceaseless means that something isn't giving up. So when I look at this, I can see that the writer's choice of adjectives absolutely tells me what conditions are happening outside of the room that she sits in. And that allows me to fully understand the uncomfortable situation that she finds herself in. Therefore, if I was able to write about this cumulative effect, I would score well. Let's look at what that might look like. I'm just going to write it here. So I'm going to start by saying the writer skillfully uses a range of, I'm just going to say negative adjectives to present a dismal feeling and description of the outside world. Now, all I've done there is I've made my point. I've included the word skillfully, just so that I'm passing some judgment and beginning my analysis. I've used some subject terminology in the form of negative adjectives, again, just to pass some judgment. And then I'm going to go on and start to use my quotations. I'm going to start by saying, firstly, by using winter to describe the afternoon, the writer, and I'm going to put successfully conveys an atmosphere of cold, unpleasant weather, which is further emphasized, which is further emphasized by wet. So I could stop at this point. You know, I've started to pull some things apart. Firstly, I've got my embedded quotation. I've explained how it describes the afternoon because the writer successfully conveys an atmosphere of cold. And then I've said that it's further emphasized by wet. But I want to show the full cumulative effect. So I want to keep going. I'm going to say, however, her deliberate use of the brutal and aggressive adjective stormbeat, apologies for how I'm writing, stormbeats has connotations of violence, which therefore suggests that the weather, the outside weather, is extremely challenging. Now, I've still got one cumulative adjective that I want to add in, so I'm going to do that. Finally, ceaseless connotes to the reader that the bad weather has lasted for quite some time, which compounds the feeling of dismay the narrator is experiencing. So again, apologies for my handwriting and the slight mess here, but let's look at the rest of it. However, and again, we've talked about the writer's intentions. Deliberate use of the brutal and aggressive adjective stormbeat has connotations of violence, which therefore suggests that the outside weather is extremely challenging. Finally, ceaseless connotes to the reader that the bad weather has lasted for quite some time, which compounds the feeling of dismay the narrator is experiencing. So rather than write something shallow and surface based on adjectives, by looking at the cumulative effect of the adjectives, we're able to create something that is meaningful and powerful. I hope you found that useful. Thank you.